Guardian State GSCLE. 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 Guardian State GSCLE.
So anyway, that's what it looks like. Lauren, show them what the mouthpiece is. This is what your clients blow into. There's a mouthpiece there. Pull it out because I want to talk about that. That comes wrapped in cellophane, and they're not supposed to touch it. And they're supposed to change it before each time your client blows. So before I forget to tell you that, I wanted you to see that. It comes in cellophane. They rip it open. They're not supposed to touch it. They put it on. There's supposedly a spit trap in there. Right, like I weigh 95 pounds. What they do in places where there are jury trials is they'll take a glass of water and put the mouthpiece and then blow the water out through the mouthpiece. Some attorneys have been sanctioned for that, but there's no spit trap in there. It's just a little piece of plastic, and that's why they have to be changed each time. So basically, this is what the instrument looks like. That's it. There's a printer that's attached to it. So it is a computer. If you ever saw the guts of your computer, you see there's a motherboard down here. It's kind of interesting. The motherboards have no replaceable components on them. They're what's called surface soldered. So if anything goes bad, a capacitor, the CPU, the memory chips, it's not like your home computer where you can pull them out and put them back in. They've got to replace the whole motherboard. One of the problems with this unit is the central processing unit, essentially the brains of the computer, is no longer made. It's no longer made by the original vendor. It's like 30 years old, and it was being made by a company in Japan as an emulation, which raises a whole bunch of issues, whether it works like the real thing. But I guess after the tsunami, they don't make them anymore either. So that's why when you hear 7110 is history, they can't make these motherboards anymore because they can't get the components. And what happens if anything fails, they have to replace the whole motherboard. And you'll see that. The PC board or the motherboard is replaced lots of times on repair records, and then it loses the memory from those tests that were done before that. And it also, usually, only one case, where it wasn't re-incremented, it starts at 0. So all the files go back to 0 again. Now, when I talk about the stuff that I've seen, let me tell you that I have examined data from 387 Alcotests in the state of New Jersey out of 500 some odd. And at last count, I've looked at 157,000 breath tests. The data that is stored, the data downloads, just to give you an idea what it looks like. May I?
Here, why don't I hold?
Yeah, you take that end. Walk that way. No. Walk. This is data downloads for, or go that way so they can see. These are data downloads. Each one of these lines is a test, and that's the data kept for each test. That's what it looks like if you print it out.
I'm going to run out of room.
Yeah, and you know why I always ask someone to hold it out? Because you get to roll it up.
Are there any names on it, or?
The names are redacted most of the time. Every once in a while they screw up, but after 6 years, the state police are getting it right. I used to get downloads on CD-ROMs where there would be driver's licenses, all the data from people, but you have the file number. So once you see the file number on your AIR, you can go to that data. And that data records almost every function that the Alcotest did for somebody's test. So there's information in there that's not on the AIR. And if you're looking for the instrument possibly malfunctioning, then you can see whether there's a pattern. What you need to understand about computers is that computers just don't make an error consistently. It's not like you get a flat tire, you get a flat tire. If you think about, and at this point, I don't even think I need to ask, probably everybody in the room uses a PC or a smartphone or a tablet. If you have a problem, it happens occasionally. Then it happens more often. Then it locks up and it won't work, and you call your IT guy or the 13-year-old kid from next door and ask him to fix it for you. That's basically what happens with computers. The Alcotest is no different. The Alcotest is has an embedded computer. It's a single-function computer. It doesn't have an operating system like Windows. It's kind of like your brand new washing machine, your microwave, your smart TV. It's just an embedded chip, and that's what it looks like. So don't forget the fact that it's a computer, and it's kind of hard for me to see from here, but there is an internal printer. I call it the supermarket tape, and in New Jersey, in many states, they use that, and that could print out an AIR and also the other tests, but in our state, we don't. They hook a brother laser printer to it, and that's what produces our documents and our AIR. But when it goes to the factory and they do tests, they use the internal printer. So here's the hose. It sits in the top. That's where the mouthpiece goes. There's a power supply, and then we have the infrared chamber and the fuel cell chamber over here. So just internalize the fact that this is a computer, and it's got to be treated a lot different than the breathalyzer. There's other people with gray hair in the room, and some starting, so you remember the breathalyzer. I have a bunch of them you can buy on eBay for 50, 60 bucks, which is what the state police were doing, by the way, to keep them under good repair. They were buying parts on eBay and fixing them because they hadn't been made in 25 years when they discontinued them. We have the distinction of being the last jurisdiction in the world to use the breathalyzer. This is not the same thing. The breathalyzer, very few moving pieces, mostly mechanical, a few simple electronic components that a high school science student could understand, and that was it. This is not the same animal. It can't be treated as the same animal. And one of the things that, I have a document there, but he's not here to throw it up, that I want to impress upon you, is you need to draw a distinction between reliability and operability. And Judge, with all due respect, judges constantly make this mistake. The prosecutor that's here, prosecutors constantly make this mistake. And what just cuts me through the heart is defense attorneys make this mistake. This unit has been deemed in State versus Chun to be reliable, but it's not necessarily operable. This laser printer, operable, reliable too, because I haven't had a problem with it. But if it has no batteries in it, it's still reliable, it's just not operable. And what it says in Chun, and it's very clear, it's just like in the breathalyzer, I actually have a slide, but I can't put it up, is that in each and every case, the state has the obligation to prove operability. So if one of your colleagues, judges, prosecutors, or defense attorneys, starts arguing the reliability, just yank, you get the cane like in the old days and take them off the stage. Don't confuse the two terms. It's reliable. Now, I've been asked, and I testify as an expert witness, do you think it's reliable? Hey, there's a given. I start with the fact that the Supreme Court said it's reliable. What I believe doesn't make a difference. There's always a starting point in science. The starting point is a legal starting point. It's reliable. There's the case on the breathalyzer said the breathalyzer is exactly accurate. That's a given, okay? There is nothing that's exactly accurate. Nothing in this world. There's certainty for death, but nothing's exactly accurate. No instrument is exactly accurate. The atomic clock is not exactly accurate, yet the Supreme Court said the breathalyzer is exactly accurate. In fact, more accurate than a venal blood puncture. Go figure, but that's where we have to start. This is a reliable instrument according to the Supreme Court, but in each and every case, the state has to prove operability. So what do? See if the procedural requirements have been met. Has to be periodically calibrated. What we do in New Jersey is called a calibration, colloquially. It is not a calibration. The only way this machine gets calibrated, and Judge King, who was a special master in State versus Chun, liked to say, you got to look under the hood. Well, if you want to look under the hood, that's what happens at Draeger. And that's what the big fight is about the repair records, because at Draeger, they measure voltages, they measure signal strengths, they measure parameters, and when you get that certificate of accuracy from Draeger in your discovery pack, that's about whether or not that instrument is functioning properly. In New Jersey, what they do is something very different. They do a check of calibration. And although I've had troopers on the stand saying, no, it's a calibration, and Lauren's going to go through the discovery documents with you in a little while, it says in their certification at the bottom, the triangle, State Police triangle, I hereby certify that I checked the calibration. They don't do anything. They can't make any adjustments. It's either working or it's not working. That's it. And their check of calibration is a little bit better than kicking the tires on a car and starting the engine and saying, I think it's okay. They do not go through a 3-page checklist of all the parameters on the instrument unless it goes back to Draeger. And that's another important thing to know. Every time it goes back to Draeger, they do another certificate of calibration. So if you know that it's gone back, then the state has to provide that certificate, and they haven't been doing a very good job about that. So that's the periodic check of calibration. There is a 20-minute lockout. 20-minute lockout has to supposedly, again, this is where the real world doesn't meet the program. It's supposed to be a 20-minute lockout between the arrest time and administering the test. And there is. But it's nonsensical because they don't give the test roadside, so it's always going to be a few minutes to the station. So what good's a 20-minute lockout? And if for some reason there's a problem with the clock, like daylight savings time, they may put the wrong time in to beat the 20-minute lockout. Good idea in concept, but it should be 20 minutes from when they show up in the station and can observe, not 20 minutes from the arrest time that's plugged in. There are also supposed to be a 20-minute observation period, and that's procedural. I'm not going to go through that, but you all know that since it's the biggest defense. There are issues, although the appellate division has spiked most of them in regard to EMI and RF, electromechanical interference and radio frequency interference. All these things that we're looking at, the lights, especially fluorescent lights, phones, the computers are RF generators. And what it says in Chun is that the instrument is well shielded. Now, again, from a technical standpoint, well shielded doesn't mean impervious. And the way that when I was a kid and played with radios, the way we would check to see if there was RF floating around, you take a transistor radio, the AM transistor radio, and hold it next to something, and you can hear the frequency. I still have a little AM radio. I'm dating myself, keeping the office in case the power goes down. If I hold that next to my office phone or next to my computer, it sounds like an explosion in outer space. And the same thing with the Alcotest. It's generally well shielded, doesn't mean impervious. Now the appellate division says, well, it's generally well shielded. That's good enough, but to be continued. Supreme Court said generally well shielded, but you still have to take cell phones and handheld radios and other electronic devices out of the room. There are some decisions and some judges that say, well, that's just procedural. You don't have to do it. If it's still in the room, it's okay. We just had one recently at my office. Oh, by the way, Lauren Scordell is my associate. I apologize for not introducing her. We had one at the office where the police officer, operator very diligently, takes the cell phone away from the defendant. And then, while the Alcotest is doing the calculation after the second breath test, the defendant says to him, can I have my phone so I can call somebody? No problem. Takes the cell phone out, and while the instrument is calculating the readings, the guy's on the cell phone in the room. You can't make this stuff up. That case is still pending, so I don't know how it comes out. And then, of course, there's operator instructions that have to be given. So what's so great about the Alcotest? The 7110 measures alcohol using two different methods. One is using infrared technology, and the other one is using electrochemical technology. And again, this is the infrared chamber. It's at 9.5 microns. So basically, this is what the inside of the chamber looks like. There's a parabolic mirror on each side to reflect the light, because otherwise you'd have to send the signal down a very long path. So it's a front-coated parabolic mirror, a gold-plated mirror, and the signal bounces back and forth. And there's an an infrared generator and an infrared receiver. And what happens is the breath comes in here and then exits out. And the molecules of alcohol, ethanol, hopefully, that's what 9.5 microns is specific for, absorb some of the signal. And the difference between the signal coming in and the signal going out is how much alcohol went through the chamber. Now, there's a big difference between the Alcotest and the old breathalyzer. The old breathalyzer used to take 450 milliliters of breath. You'd blow into it, and those of you that remember hearing it, or unfortunately maybe had to take the test, you'd hear a slap, the cylinder would go over, and it would trap that 450 milliliters and do a test on it. This is what I call a blow-through machine. You blow 1.5 liters, or if you're a 60-year-old woman, you get to blow 1.2 liters. And what happens is it blows continuously through here and then back out. So it takes the reading on the fly as it's reading the alcohol in the breath, and there are criteria for that, and they're in your materials. You have to blow 1.5 liters, 4.5 seconds. It's supposed to have a relatively flat slope. In other words, the amount of alcohol has to almost level off. It doesn't quite level off, and that's in your materials. Or it rejects the sample. Mouth alcohol can cause that, and there's a mouth alcohol detector, or other extraneous biological factors can affect that. So it'll force another test if they're willing to give it to you and don't think you're trying to refuse. So the alcohol is measured. Now, if you come away with only a couple of nuggets today, one of them I want you to understand is this chamber does not produce a reading. There's a signal. Think about a tone. Gets louder or lower. That's an analog signal. All that comes out of here is an analog signal, not a reading. People have this misconception that somehow a reading is made from the fuel cell, a reading is made from the infrared chamber, all the data is discretely generated in the software. None of that is true. That's because people don't understand software and don't understand the machine. All that comes out here is a signal, a tone, if you will, an analog signal. It's then digitized into ones and zeros, and that digital information is then processed by the microprocessor. So if RF gets in here anywhere in the stage, in the CPU, in the memory where the signal strength is stored after it's digitized in the digitizer, that affects whether the instrument is working properly. All those things are important. It does not produce a reading. I've heard prosecutors say to me, well, you know, it didn't give a valid test, but, you know, look at this infrared number. Well, it doesn't mean anything. If it's not a valid test, it's not a valid test. I mean, something wasn't working. So there's a signal that comes out of here. The second thing that, hopefully that's the next slide, right here is the fuel cell. It's mounted on top of this chamber. This is a cross-section of this through the blow-through chamber. And this is the fuel cell, the electrochemical sensor, which is mounted on the top. And here's what an electrochemical sensor is, because I don't want you going home going, oh my God, he's talking electric. It's a battery. It's just simply a battery. If you ever made a battery in 5th or 6th grade where you had a carbon anode and you put a cathode in it, a lead can, and then put some acid in it, that's all it is. It's a battery. There are platinum plates in here. The platinum plates are coated with a dry acid. If I remember correctly, it's sulfuric or acetic acid. And what happens is when the alcohol hits here, it becomes the electrolyte that causes a current to flow between the plates. It activates the battery. And these have been used for a very long time. All the roadside devices, and in some states they're actually accepted, they're not accepted here, use fuel cells. Now, they can be fooled, and that's the beauty of the Alcotest, if it's functioning, operational, is that you get a reading by one method, and then you get a reading by the other method. To show you what the fuel cell looks like, that's what it is. This baby here sits right on top of here. And those have to be replaced periodically. Draeger's literature says that they have to be replaced every 4 to 6 years. Oh, it's right there. This is a Draeger presentation, by the way. 4 to 6 years. I will tell you in New Jersey, the average is less than 3 years. The fuel cells get replaced. I have lots of theories why, since they won't sell us Alcotests, that I can't test the theories, but I think it has to do with some of our atmospheric issues in New Jersey. So that's the other technology. Again, what comes out of that fuel cell? What comes out of that fuel cell is a signal. It's an analog signal. And if the idea of digital and analog like make you crazy, a signal that comes off a record is analog. A signal that comes off your iPhone or your MP3 is digital. It's a computer file that then gets decoded and turned back into music, where from the record, it's an actual music file that you're listening to. Everybody know what records are? Okay. Every once in a while on a repair record, you'll see fuel cell changed, plates replaced. The reason the plates are replaced most of the time, I'm told, by someone from the state police that still talks to me, is that because the fuel cells open up and leak the acid, and then they start to eat the plates that mount them. So if it says fuel cell and plates, it could be prophylactically changed, but more likely than not, the fuel cell leaked, and that's why they changed it. That's the CU-34. It's very simply named because it's the control unit, the CU-34. There's two of them sitting over there, so you can take a look at them. This CU-34 that Draeger uses in the presentation, is actually in their manual, is for a breathalyzer, not for an Alcotest. And the ones I bought on eBay are also for breathalyzers. What's the difference? Instead of having a temperature probe, this uses a thermometer. And the troopers would go out and actually read the temperature on the thermometer. But now what we do, instead of putting this thermometer in here, it's a lab thermometer. Okay, now we use a temperature probe. The temperature probe I have is not an Alcotest temperature probe. It can hold up the one from the control company thermometer. An electronic temperature probe. So when you're checking the probe value, that's something that plugs into the back of the Alcotest and then goes into here to measure the temperature. So the simulator solution here goes into this vessel. There's a stirring paddle here. And this is a heater, and it heats it to 34 degrees C, plus or minus. And by the way, in your materials, the plus or minus 2%, the materials have the wrong range. It needs to be within a tighter tolerance than what's shown. And what happens is the vapor that forms over the solution, and usually it's 0.10 unless they're testing it at 0.04, 0.08, and 0.16 for linearity. The 1.0 solution forms a gas, and that gas is in proportion to the solution, the 0.10 solution, and it's considered acceptable if that 0.10 solution is read by the instrument between 0.095 and 0.105. Aha! Nothing's exactly accurate. So Draeger recognizes that it's a good test when it reads 1.0 at 0.095 to 0.105. That's one of the big things Chun recognized. Special Master recognized it, and the Supreme Court adopted it without any comment. It says everything the Special Master said is adopted unless commented on herein. Now I'm paraphrasing. Nothing is exactly accurate. So think about the implications of that. If your client blows 1.0, the machine can never be more, the instrument can never be more accurate than the calibration solution. Think about that. Forget about being attorneys. Forget about all the Supreme Court opinions. You're a 6th grader in school, and your teacher says, this sample is good to plus or minus 5%. Calibrate this instrument to that sample. Can you ever have the instrument more accurate than the sample? It might occasionally be, but it can't. This is logic, it's reason, and somehow difficult to get across to judges and appellate division, and the Supreme Court adopted it, but I don't think they understood it. So this alone shows that there's plus or minus 5%. So that's how this works. Now this has a hose that hooks into the back of the Alcotest, and when a control test is done, it sucks the vapor out of there. It's the same way, instead of breathing in, it comes out of CU34, and it measures it. And you'll see the control test, and Lauren's going to go through the documents for you. And it has to come up between 0.95 and 1.05, even though it has 1 over solution in it, and then it's considered accurate. Not only is this accepted to plus or minus 5%, but the solution itself is only held when it's assayed. When they say it's 1.0, it's only held to 2%. And the heater in here is only held to 1.33%. So when I went to school, you aggregate those, you end up with 8.33. And that's the best this machine can ever be, consistently. Sometimes it can be even better, but not consistently. And, you know, now put your lawyer hat back on. Who gets the benefit of the doubt? In DUIs, the state. This is where, you know, obviously the on-off switch, this is where the RS-232 connector is. When they used to come out and download the data, they would hook it up there. That's where the printer hooks up. There's a port for a keyboard. It's a conventional keyboard, although a very old style one. And the hookup for the port. This can run on 12 volts, and it also can run on AC. We use AC. And there's also a place here where the the temperature probe plugs in. And that's another thing people don't understand. The temperature probe is always, a temperature probe is always hooked to the back of the Alcotest and in the CU34 to make sure that it's at the right temperature. When the coordinators come out, they have their own temperature probes they bring, and they use. So for the check of calibration sequence, you'll see documents for one control, for one temperature probe, and then the department usually has 1 or 2. When they're sold, they usually sell 2. If they have multiple machines, there may be more. And one of the issues I have is, if you're doing a check of calibration, you calibrate all the pieces together. That's scientific method. If you change the thermometer out midway, how do we know everything's working? And that's, you know, that's an issue. It's never gone up yet. One of these days it will, and I suspect it'll get spiked. But from a scientific standpoint, when you have a 4-step process and you're calibrating everything, you do it all together. So let's talk about, I know it's a hard concept, and I want Lauren to get to the documents because you probably have a lot of questions, but I think it's important fundamentally that you understand how the instrument works, or the rest of this doesn't make any sense. So now we know that there's an infrared reading, which is an analog reading, and there's an electrochemical cell reading, which is an analog reading. How does that turn into an AIR? And of course, during the procedure, the officer brings the defendant in, and starts typing information in about the driver's license, about ticket number, about their pedigree, etc. I always thought that was funny that they use that word pedigree. And that information is supposed to be checked by the officer before they go on to the next step. So we just saw one recently where, what was it, the guy was 5'1" and he weighed 5 pounds, 1 ounce or something.
5'2", right? 5 feet 2 inches was in as the weight. Is that the one you're talking about?
Two possibilities. The officer typed it in wrong the second time. Well, then he violated procedure because he's supposed to double check it all before he goes on to the next step. Or maybe the software didn't work properly. Okay, we got to root it out. The doubt in order to the benefit of the fill in the blank. Okay, and Chun also says if there's any blanks on the AIR, then it's inadmissible, because we demonstrated to them that there could be blanks on the AIR, and that there still could be an issue that the information could be there and show up as blank. But what I want you to understand is that all the functions, whether it's reproducing the driver's license, recording the digitized version of the electrochemical cell and the infrared cell, they all get mixed together. I've had attorneys, which includes prosecutors and judges, go, oh, you know what, the address is wrong, you know, the driver's license is wrong, it has a 4 instead of having the CU34, it has this and that, but the readings printed out, they must be okay. That's not the way software works. There's 50,000 lines of code that were written for this program. That's a stack of printouts that's about this high, actually over 50,000 lines of code. That code is human recognizable language. That's what we do software in, human recognizable language. It's programmed in a language called C. That then runs through a computer program called a compiler. And it turns it in, for want of a better way to explain it, to the ones and zeros that a computer can read. Once it gets compiled into the ones and zeros so the computer can read it in here, you can't tell which 1 and 0 has to do with the guy's weight, his age, whether the control test number is right, whether the readings were calculated properly for the Alcotest. It's a failure. And somehow or other, this myth persists that, well, if it shows the reading must be right, even though there's other things that screw it up. Because once it's compiled and turned into the ones and zeros, which we call object code or machine language, the computer is just doing what computers do. It's crunching the numbers and figuring out the answers. And one can affect the other. In fact, I've seen data downloads where all of a sudden, somehow, the computer malfunctions because of a software error, and instead of printing out data in the data fields, it starts printing out printer code to tell it to the language that they use to tell the printer to print. So what it did was, essentially, was in this room and listening to me boring you, and then all of a sudden is transported into the other room listening to something that's a non sequitur. This is what happens with computers. We know it ourselves. It happens all the time. Had a problem with my Outlook client yesterday with my email. I had to shut the computer off, reboot it, and all of a sudden it worked again. These things have no operating system. They can't be rebooted. The instructions from Draeger are, if there's a malfunction, it goes back. Now, in practice, does that happen? First thing the state police tell them to do is unplug it, plug it back in, and see if it works. It's not a dish network box. It's not a VCR. It's not a smart TV. It's not a computer. It's an embedded computer without an operating system. It can't reboot itself. So the downloads, as I say, reveal information. You can see patterns. I've kept statistics on the tests that I've looked at. I'll see some instruments where there's a huge number of control test failures. Maybe something's up. I've seen instruments with an inordinate number of refusals. That could be badly trained police officers, or it could be a malfunctioning instrument. And what I've done is, because I have an interactive database, I analyze those things and I can see whether a machine is acting peculiar. I know what the error rate is for most instruments. So that's why it's important to look at repair records. It's a reliable instrument. Gosh, if anybody in here, I'm memorizing every one of your faces, ever stands up in a courtroom and says, this shows the instrument's not reliable, you're going to get it from me. Judges included. What you have to talk about is operability. Operability. Is it operating? Is the software executing properly? Procedurally, was that followed so that the machine, the instrument, and there's an argument whether it's an instrument or a machine. The state likes to call it an instrument. It's actually both, but it more properly is called an instrument because it's making a measurement. If you take a quick look at the materials in the book Bob provided to you, there's discovery, and you will have a chance to go through it. There's a picture of a bottle of a simulator solution. I don't know what the latest is. They used to make them in batches of 1,000 or 1,500 bottles at a time. There are some pictures that repeat, although not quite as clearly as the ones I showed you today. And then we have let me have
the discoveries in the handout.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's in their handout. Let me have the control company thermometer, if you don't mind. So what's this about a control company or the old Urco Hart? The Supreme Court said Urco Hart, and there was litigation as to whether it really had to be an Urco Hart. It's like saying if you watch TV, it only has to be on a Motorola. But they did say it, and if the Supreme Court said the sun was, or the sky was red, we'd have to all believe it was red. Or if the instrument is exactly accurate, we'd have to believe it. So if it says it has to be calibrated with an Urco Hart, we try to do, the defense bar tried to do the same thing. I said, no. Any NIST traceable thermometer. So this is what a control company thermometer looks like. They went to this because it's a lot cheaper than an Urco Hart. Rather than have it calibrated, they just throw it out. Okay, so I bought mine. It's probably coming to the end of its life. They're like $300. I mean, it works fine, but at the end of its calibration, I'm not going to send it back and calibrate it for $150. But basically, it's a digital thermometer. It has a temperature probe. A temperature probe is just like the temperature probe that they use to put in the CU-34. But what happens is they want to check to make sure that the instrument is functioning properly and really warming to 34 degrees C, plus or minus. So what they do is they turn the CU-34s on that they're going to use for the 08, the 04, the 08, the 16, and the 10. And then they use this to verify that the temperature's okay. Then when they hook the CU, they take the probe out. This goes home to the police officer. Some of them actually take them out of their cars and literally take them home because they don't want them to get damaged in the heat. So this is an instrument that is used during the state police check of calibration. Police departments don't own these. These go home, or at least back in the car, with the police officers. Then there's two types of temperature probes. The black key temperature probe sounds sinister, but really what the key means is that it opens up some internal functions on the instrument that normally would not be accessible to operators. There's a whole bunch of functions that they need, and also opens up the ability to do the check of calibration functions. A regular trained operator can't do that. So what they do is, the key essentially is a temperature probe that has a chip on it, or has a key on it, essentially. And when the business end of it is in the CU-34, and this goes in the back of the Alcotest, it opens up these administrative functions. It's like on your office computers. You may have administrator mode and user mode. So this essentially, the police officers get it in user mode, and then when this gets plugged in, it goes into administrative mode. So that's why when they do the calibration, the check of calibration, that is the four-step process, the calibrate, control test part 1, control test part 2, linearity, and then the last step is doing a solution change. They use the black key temperature probe. With the solution change, they go back to the department's probe. And that's why you'll get 2 or 3 certifications. If a department has 2, they may automatically send you 2. And one of the things you want to check is that they swap the probe mid-stream or not. Some judges think that's improper, some don't. But don't confuse the old Urquhart, the control company thermometer probes with the probe that stays in the station. The probe is simply the wire and a solid state device in the bottom of a stainless steel tube that goes into the top of the CU-34. I had Lauren roll out that statistically how to roll up those data downloads. I printed those out when I was first trying to teach myself what they're about. Each one of those data downloads, if you look at them, you can open them in Excel, or you can open them in Quattro Pro. The state uses Quattro Pro, I suspect, because that suite is cheaper. They use WordPerfect in Quattro Pro. You can buy it very inexpensively. But each one has a column heading, so you know what's in that column. And I have a key, which was delivered as an exhibit in Sean, and if you give us your email address, I will mail you that key. So if you open them up and want to kind of scout around and see what's there, you'll be able to figure it out. Now, the state has established a data repository in order to make a database. The database has now been deemed by the Supreme Court to be the same as a data repository. The difference is a database lets you analyze data. The data repository just lets you download it. So I've maintained my own database where I download the machines and then can do analysis on it that I explained to you before. And those are available. You can just buy your client's test, or for $60, they'll give you every test the instrument ever did. It's a sliding scale, and you can sign up. There's a portal through the state police. Those files are supposed to be redacted. There's an issue in regard to some of those files being erased. It makes multiple files, and one of the things I'll give you in the download, if you want us to make it accessible to you, is what all those files are. Now, that was in what people loosely call Chun 2, when there was an attack by several defense attorneys, and I did a 100-page affidavit about how the data didn't conform to what was in the instrument, and how it was being redacted, how things were missing, and improperly redacted, not taking out defendants' names, and that not all the records were there. And the Supreme Court said close enough for Alcotest work. So many of those issues are foreclosed, although I think there's still some that are defensible based on operation, because they did say you have to show operation. And the question, which has not been answered to my satisfaction, is if you let us have the data so we can analyze it, how does it not matter? Did you give it to us just to placate us? Obviously, data logs are to see whether or not something functions. You know this plane that went down? If you watch CNN, there's always a plane going down. There's a black box. Black box is a data log. That's essentially all the equipment, what was happened, and it records it. You have trouble with your modern car. You go into the dealer, they plug a computer in, and they read, oh yeah, the transmission's slipping, or the fourth cylinder isn't firing, or the injector's not right. That's a data log. The data logging done in the Alcotest is nothing special. It's crude by today's standards because it's a 25-year-old instrument. But nonetheless, it data logs. And one of the things we fought hard for in Chun, and they granted us, was the right to look at those data logs. So, hopefully someone will eventually pose the question, if it makes no difference if you erase them or not, if it makes no difference if they're complete, if it makes no difference that they're not accurate, then why'd you give them to us? I mean, had I been on the other side of the argument rather than an expert as an advocate, I would have said, what's the use? What's the point? And, that's to be continued, because whatever new machine they give us, it's going to data log. And in some states, they don't give them to you. The 7110s used in New York, every jurisdiction uses a different machine. They use them, and they will use them in Massachusetts. They just switched to the 9510. They won't give them data logs. Judges refuse. Here, we got the benefit of the data logs to see whether the machine is misexecuting. The analogy I like to use is, let's say you have a LASIK surgery. You're on the table, they're ready to lock you out, and the doctor says to you, now, I think the surgical probe is working okay. The last 5 times we did this, it didn't function properly, but we think it's working okay. We're going to operate on you. What are you going to say? Get me the hell off the table. Well, if I look at the data log for the Alcotest, and I see it mix executes 5 times in a row, and then gives my client a test, you think maybe that's an issue? Or if I see out of 100 tests, 75 didn't work, do you think maybe that's an issue? I know it would be if I was having laser surgery on my eyes. That's operability. And operability is not like a hammer. It either bangs nails in or not. It's how do all these functions get integrated in the software and still produce a result. And this is the hardest thing to communicate to the bar at large and the bench, because they don't understand the way computers operate. So you need to go away with that today. Don't ever let somebody say, well, this looks okay, so it's okay if that's wrong on an AIR. If any of it's wrong, it's all wrong. 25 tests or 30 days, the solution has to be changed, and that's CU34. Okay? So I'm going to turn it over because Lauren's excellent with the documents, and I'm losing my voice. But 2 things, please. Difference between reliability and operability. Reliability is whether the machine can be used for the purposes intended. Operability is whether it's working on that day or not. And also integration of functions. You cannot look at one function on the AIR, even if it's the age or the guy's name or whatever else, and divorce that from the readings.
First thing that we have in your packet is the operator's card. So that's one of the things that has to be entered in evidence, okay, in any DWI, and that card must be good at the time that the Alcotest was given to your client, right? When they get trained, their training is good for the year in which they get it. So if they got it today, it's good for today plus 2 calendar years, okay? So you want to remember that. This is what Sam was saying is the control test part 1, but we're actually going to go to the calibration record.
It's not right there.
Because that is the first thing. That's the, my name is Sam, right? Each document has a sequential file number. It's right here, okay? So you want these documents to be in order. This is the black key temperature probe serial number. You're also going to get a certificate of accuracy for the black key temperature probe in Discovery, or you should be. It's got the Urquhart the serial number for the thermometer. Now it's not Urquhart, now it's that control company. They're going to put it in the same line, it still says Urquhart. The calibration record and the control tests and the linearity tests and the new standard solution report that's done at the time of calibration, the file date is going to be the same as the calibration date. But on the AIR and the new standard solution report that's done right before your client's test, the file date will be different, but the calibration date will be the same. The solution control lot, right? And the bottle number, that's going to be on all those documents. Next one is the linearity test. So this one has a lot of information on it. Sequential file number, calibration date. Then it's going to go through the 04, 08, 16. Okay, they have to put on, as Sam told you, they have to put on different calibrating units, different CU34s, right, for each one that they do, because it's got a different solution in it. So there's a serial number for the CU34 for the 04. There's a different solution, different, it tells you when it expires. You'll get an assay again for that you can check. Make sure that they didn't, that it's not expired. You can also check originally, it hasn't happened in a while, but there were a few cases where it was signed off on and notarized before the date that it was checked. So just, little things. Okay, same thing with the 08 and the 16. You're going to have a different CU34 number. You're going to have a different solution number, all of those, and then it will show you here that all the tests were passed. Okay. This is for the coordinator who performs all the functions when they do the check of calibration. Okay, so here we've got his breath test coordinator instructor card.
But you have to find it.
Unlike with the operator certification,
the solution number, that's the asset.
There is no requirement that they get recertified. So once they are, so you'll see one date on there. It's apparently good in perpetuity.
As long as they keep up their Alcotest.
Their Alcotest certification still has to be at the right. That's good for the calendar year in which it's given, plus 2 years.
It could be 2 years and 364 days.
Right. Or 2 years and 1 day.
Or in 1 day if they took it
today. New standard solution report. This one is at the time of calibration. So the calibration date and the file date are going to be the same. The sequential file number, again, should just be one higher than the linearity tests. It's got everything else in here. The thing that you're going to look for specifically, temperature probe, serial number. This is the temperature probe that is kept at the police department. This is not the black key one that the coordinator brings. They're using their own, now they're using the police department's own bottles, and their solution bottles and their own temperature probe, which gets left on the instrument. You're going to get a second new standard solution report unless your client's test was within 30 days or 25 tests of the one that happened at the time of calibration. You'll get a second one.
By the way, the average in New Jersey is 12 or 13 tests before they have to change the solution. Never seen one make to 25.
Right. So this one here, it's got a different file date than calibration date. Should be it's probably going to be the same solution control lot. But here you'll see they don't put in the temperature probe serial number. The rationale, I think, is that they're not supposed to touch it. I think that's, some of the prosecutors here could probably tell you that the police departments they're told don't touch it. And it supposedly is the same one that's on. But, okay, so This is an example of a 0.10% breath alcohol simulator solution, certificate of analysis or an assay. It'll have the analysis date on it down at the bottom. It will be notarized on hopefully a date that is later than the analysis date. It will tell you the lot number, right? Okay. And it will also tell you here when the solution expires.
That's what I was calling the assay by the state police.
Right.
That's the technical name.
Okay. Best document you're going to get. They're all important, but this is the one. This is the AIR. We probably all have seen them. You're going to have the serial number here, the sequential file number, all of the sequential file numbers for all of those functions performed by the coordinator. Those are listed right above the sequential file number for the AIR. You're going to have a first control test. Should be a 2-minute gap in between each test. Then you're going to have a first breath test. You're going to have 2 readings, right? 2 minutes, a second breath test, 2 minutes, and another control test. And if everything is intolerance, it doesn't mean it's right. You gotta look at everything else.
Doesn't mean it's accurate.
Doesn't mean, well, okay, I'm sorry. It doesn't mean it's accurate.